They said it was routine enforcement. They said they were following up on an anonymous tip. So they came to my home, uninvited, unannounced, and completely unaware of who they were dealing with. What they didn't know is that I run this town's law enforcement, and by the time they realized, they'd already crossed too many lines to turn back. This is the story of how a nosy HOA tried to intimidate the wrong homeowner and ended up reporting to the man they tried to threaten. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where nothing interesting is supposed to happen. I had just returned from night shift, my usual rotation handling department logistics and prepping new recruits. I was off duty, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, standing in my own kitchen making coffee when I heard the knock. Not the polite kind, the kind that carries authority it doesn't actually have. When I opened the door, two people stood on my porch, a middle-aged woman in a blazer with a clipboard, and a younger man holding what looked like a phone or tablet. The woman introduced herself immediately. "Good morning, sir. I'm Karen Willis with the Oakview HOA Compliance Board. We're following up on a neighborhood complaint." No smile, no greeting. Straight to business. I raised an eyebrow. "Complaint? About what?" She glanced at her clipboard like it was a holy script. "Possible unauthorized modifications to the backyard structure, noise disturbances after curfew, and suspicious foot traffic late at night." That one made me laugh. Suspicious foot traffic. I literally work law enforcement. Half the officers in town swing by for briefings or coffee between shifts, but I kept my face neutral. "I wasn't notified about any complaint," I said. "We don't always notify if the complaint is considered credible and active," she snapped back. "Anonymous sources are protected." I looked past her and noticed the young man was already trying to peek into the side yard. I stepped outside, slowly closing the door behind me. "So let me get this straight. You're on my property investigating claims I haven't seen without notifying me, and you're recording my home?" She didn't like that. Her eyes narrowed. "We're allowed to inspect common visual areas. If there's a violation, we have full authority to document it." I smiled slightly. "That true? Because I'm pretty familiar with property law around here." She bristled. "Sir, we're just trying to maintain the standards of this neighborhood." That's when it hit me. They had no idea. They didn't recognize me out of uniform. Didn't know they were talking to the chief of police for the very city their HOA existed in. And something in me clicked. I decided, in that moment, I wouldn't correct them. Not yet. I looked at the man holding the device. "Is that recording?" He nodded. "Turn it off. You're not law enforcement. And this is private property. Unless you have a warrant, that's surveillance." Karen's face flushed. "We don't need a warrant for community enforcement." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "You do now." That's when she tried to play her final card. "If you're refusing cooperation, we'll be issuing a formal citation and scheduling a compliance inspection, with or without consent." I crossed my arms. "Go ahead, and make sure it's addressed properly. Chief Jackson, City of Oakview." "Police Department." The silence that followed was glorious. You'd think the revelation would have ended it. That once Karen heard the words Chief of Police, she'd back off, apologize, maybe even pretend it was a misunderstanding. But no, some people double down even when they're cornered. She turned, pale, blinked 3 times, then said, "Well, that doesn't exempt you from HOA policy." Bold. Wrong, but bold. I gave her one more out. "Karen, I'm going to pretend you didn't just trespass, attempt unauthorized surveillance, and threaten enforcement without due process. Walk away now, and we'll call it a misunderstanding." But she didn't. Instead, she said, "We'll be submitting a full report to the board. You can expect formal consequences." I nodded once. "Great. Make sure to spell my title correctly." They left, stiff and quiet. The moment the car pulled away, I walked back inside and sat down at my desk. Not in the kitchen, but the one where I review internal affairs complaints and sign off on tactical deployment reports. I opened a new file. Title: HOA Trespass Incident, Oakview Subdivision. I added time, date, names, and a full narrative. Why? Because if they were going to play official, I was going to play more official. 2 days later, I received a letter, certified mail. A bright red compliance notice, with the HOA logo in the top corner and Violation Series B typed in all caps. It listed 3 things: excessive noise levels, unauthorized exterior lighting, and failure to respond to prior investigation. I laughed out loud. There was no warning, no citation process, just a punishment. That was their mistake. I walked the letter down to City Legal. Our attorney raised an eyebrow. They really sent this to you? I nodded. And they walked on my property without consent. He smiled. Well, that's not going to end well. For them. He drafted a formal response from the city on department letterhead, stating that any further action would be considered harassment and unlawful enforcement. But I wasn't satisfied with just defense. I wanted documentation. So I submitted a formal request under the Freedom of Information Act to obtain the HOA's internal logs, meeting minutes, and complaints issued within the past 90 days. As a public safety official, I had every right to ensure that no public health or safety concerns were being falsely leveraged to access private property. What I got back was gold. The complaint against me had no name, no address, just a vague note. Resident at Lot 14 suspected of improper gatherings and exterior modification. Recommend investigation. And guess what? Lot 14 isn't even my property number. That alone would be enough to void the citation. But there was more. Timestamps on the internal log showed that Karen had initiated the investigation herself, without board approval. I cross-referenced the date with my schedule. I wasn't even home during the alleged disturbance. I was at the precinct until 3 a.m. and security footage confirmed it. The noise complaint? Fake. The backyard structure? A standard issue shed permitted by the city before I even moved in. Everything they had, every claim, was built on nothing but assumption and ego. So, I put together a packet, full documentation, legal statements, footage, timeline. I sent one to the HOA board, another to city zoning, and just for fun, one to the local news station that covers civic overreach stories. I didn't say a word. I just let the paper trail speak for itself, because when you operate within the law and you enforce it for a living, you don't need to yell. You just shine a light and wait for the cockroaches to scatter. It only took a few days for the packet to do its job. I didn't have to call a meeting, make a scene, or knock on doors. I let facts do what emotion rarely can, erode the illusion of control. The first crack came quietly. A member of the HOA board, Dan from 3 streets over, slipped a note into my mailbox. No envelope, just a handwritten message. Didn't know what she was doing. I never voted for that inspection. Apologies. Short, honest, and telling. Then came the emails. 2 different residents CC'd me on their own formal complaints, sent directly to the HOA, requesting an immediate explanation for the anonymous investigation. If they can come for the chief of police, one wrote, what stops them from walking into my yard? That's the thing about bullies. Once one person stands up, everyone else realizes they were never really strong, just loud. The next HOA meeting was packed. Normally, these things are ghost towns. 5 people in folding chairs talking about fence heights and mailbox color. But this one, standing room only. I didn't even have to show up. The noise had already reached every house in the subdivision, and people came with questions, real ones. Who authorized the complaint? Where is the written policy that allows inspections without notice? Why is the HOA spending money on citations that don't hold up legally? Karen was there. So was Gerald, the board vice president. But they weren't smiling this time. No clipboards, No bravado. Just folders in their laps, and the look of people who know they're sitting on a sinking ship. From what I heard later, Karen tried to blame procedural confusion, said she was just following the process. But then someone pulled out a copy of my packet, the one showing that she wrote the complaint herself. Silence. And then, just like that, the meeting turned. People began sharing their own stories. Fines for leaving a garden hose out, warnings about too many cars in the driveway. One elderly couple had received a threat of lien over a fence they'd had for 20 years. It all started pouring out. The control, the pressure, the fear, it had been simmering under the surface. But now, it was boiling. Later that night, my neighbor Jeff caught me unloading groceries. "You really lit a fuse," he said, half smiling. "I didn't know they could be challenged like that." I shrugged. "They're not law, they just act like it." He nodded slowly. "Well, they're acting a lot quieter now." The HOA board released a statement the next morning. Classic damage control. "We take resident concerns seriously. Our goal has always been to foster a respectful and compliant community. We will be reviewing our enforcement protocols and making adjustments where necessary." Translation? We got caught and were panicking. But it was too late. The community had already seen behind the curtain. And now the HOA wasn't feared. It was being watched closely. There's a moment when the hunter realizes he's being hunted. For the HOA board, that moment came the day they received a certified envelope, hand-delivered by one of our department's civilian liaisons. Inside, a notice of formal inquiry into potential misuse of authority under local municipal code, signed by me. See, while most people think the HOA operates outside government oversight, there are legal boundaries they can't cross. And once they impersonate law enforcement, access private property without proper cause, or fabricate safety complaints, that becomes my territory. Not as a homeowner, as the chief of police. And I wasn't just going to file a complaint. I was going to file a case. I appointed a small task unit to investigate the HOA's recent enforcement patterns. Not undercover agents, just internal auditors, pulling records, timestamps, and resident testimonies. Quietly, efficiently. I knew the HOA would try to cover their tracks, so I didn't give them the chance. Everything was already documented. Screenshots, emails, citations, even phone recordings from residents who'd called the HOA and been pressured to pay administrative fees in cash. One call stood out. A young couple who had moved in 3 months earlier said Karen threatened to delay their move-in approval unless they paid a fast-track orientation fee. There's no such fee in the HOA's bylaws. It was extortion, plain and simple. I added it to the case file and flagged it for legal review, but I wasn't just playing defense. I wanted permanent change. So I called a special session with City Council. I presented everything, not just what happened to me, but a pattern of behavior affecting dozens of residents. I suggested we introduce a motion requiring third-party oversight of all HOA enforcement actions related to health, safety, or law, meaning they'd have to report through us before they could act. Not rubber stamp their power, revoke it. Chatine. Motion passed unanimously. Suddenly, the HOA was no longer judge, jury, and executioner. They became what they were always supposed to be, a glorified landscaping committee with no teeth. And when Karen received the memo, I imagined the sound of her clipboard hitting the floor echoed through that quiet little office like a thunderclap. But I wasn't finished. I issued a public bulletin through the department. If any Oakview resident believes they have been subject to unlawful HOA harassment or privacy violation, contact our office. We are listening. And oh, they called. Emails, voicemails, handwritten letters. People thanking us, others sharing stories that made mine look tame. The HOA didn't just overreach, they'd built a culture of fear under the guise of standards. But now fear had changed sides. The community meetings felt different after that, lighter. People brought chairs, snacks, even music. They weren't scared of speaking anymore. They were curious, engaged. The power dynamic had shifted, and it wasn't centered around the HOA's outdated rulebook. It was centered around truth. And the most ironic part? All of this could have been avoided if they had just knocked politely. Sometimes the loudest takedowns happen in silence. There were no dramatic arrests, no town square confrontations, no headlines screaming, "Ho, shut down." No, what happened next was much better. It was quiet, systematic, controlled, and permanent. After the motion passed and City Council revoked the HOA's enforcement rights, they tried to pretend like nothing changed. Karen still showed up to meetings. The board still sent newsletters. But now their tone had shifted. Words like mandatory became recommended. Citations turned into friendly reminders. The bark was still there, but the teeth were gone. And people noticed. One by one, homeowners started pushing back. They questioned policies, demanded accountability. Some even requested refunds for years of excessive fines. A few brave souls requested copies of board meeting transcripts under HOA transparency rules. What they found? Dozens of enforcement. Decisions made without votes, without minutes, and sometimes without legal authority. That became the final crack in the foundation. Then came the resignations. First Gerald, the vice president, then 2 other board members, quietly citing personal reasons. They left in the middle of the night. No farewell emails, no community thank you notes, just gone. Karen, of course, tried to hold the line. She sent a reaffirmation of vision email to the neighborhood, claiming the HOA was refocusing on beautification and wellness. No one read it. At that point, her authority was like a candle in the wind. At the next board meeting, barely 5 people showed up. Karen sat at the front like a teacher in an empty classroom, hoping the students would come back. They didn't, because once people realize they've been manipulated, they don't forget, they reorganize. And that's exactly what we did. I helped form a resident advisory group, made up of real neighbors, teachers, retired officers, business owners, volunteers. No clipboards, no power trips. Just people who wanted things to work. We created a communication channel with city zoning, public works, and the local police department. Convenient since I run it. Within weeks, it was clear. This new group wasn't about controlling people. It was about serving them. We rewrote the guidelines, turned the HOA's bloated 47-page rulebook into a simple 6-page living code. No jargon, no fine print. Just mutual respect, safety, and basic upkeep. The result? Fewer complaints, more community projects, and surprisingly, better lawn care. Turns out when people aren't threatened, they actually participate. One weekend, we held a neighborhood BBQ in the park, the same park Karen once tried to shut down over noise pollution. Over 100 people showed up. Kids ran through sprinklers, old couples danced to live music, and nobody got fined for parking 2 inches over a curb. That day, I realized something important. We didn't just dismantle a system, we replaced it with something better. And as for the old HOA office, we converted it into a community resource center. Free Wi-Fi, legal resources, after-school tutoring on weekends. The same space once used to send threats and warnings was now being used to educate, empower, and uplift. Justice, poetic and practical. No drama, no noise, just a clipboard, gently laid down, and never picked up again. It had been 3 months since Karen last stepped foot in the neighborhood. No more HOA letters, no more early morning patrols, no more red stickers threatening citations. Just silence and sunlight. The street felt different now, lighter, like it could breathe again. But the memory of what happened hadn't disappeared. It lived in every unlocked gate, every repaint job done in peace, every family that finally relaxed on their front porch without looking over their shoulder. And me? I still lived here. Same house, same routine. Except now, every time I left for Work. I passed the new community board, a simple wooden structure we installed near the park, where people could pin announcements, birthdays, missing pets, or thank you notes to neighbors. The same board Karen once tried to use to post mandatory noise curfews. I had it repurposed. Her old rules now fueled community cookouts. One morning, while sipping coffee on my porch, I noticed a moving truck in front of Karen's former house. A young couple stepping out, holding boxes, smiling. I walked over, introduced myself, told them they'd moved into a great street, full of good people. The woman asked, "Anything we should know about the HOA here?" I smirked. Let's just say, that story ended well. They laughed. I didn't tell them I was the reason it ended. They didn't need to know. That wasn't the point. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wave a badge or demand attention. It watches, listens, waits. And when it moves with certainty. The same way I handled this entire situation. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. I just had to be the calm in the storm, the part of the system that still worked when everything else fell apart. Karen thought she could police the police. She thought the uniform only meant something inside City Hall. But the truth is, authority doesn't turn off when the badge comes off. Respect is earned. But lines get drawn once. One of my officers asked me recently, "Chief, how did you stay so calm through all that?" I told him the truth, because I knew they'd already lost the moment they stepped onto my property, not because of who I am, but because of how they did it, without integrity, without process, without respect, and no amount of policy can survive that. The department made changes too. We started offering HOA awareness sessions to new recruits, so they'd know how to navigate civil disputes, where authority ends, and how to educate citizens on their rights. We even partnered with the Community Advisory Group to help other neighborhoods review their own HOA structures. What started as one violation turned into citywide reform. I still keep the original compliance letter framed in my office, not out of pride, but as a reminder. A symbol of what happens when people try to enforce power without understanding who they're talking to, or who they're talking down to. And if there's one final lesson in all of this, it's that the badge doesn't make the man, but sometimes the man behind the badge has to remind them exactly whose house they just walked into.